Explain to us what difference it makes, whether it's three people in the deal or two-party deals. What difference does the bilateral versus multilateral make?
Well, it makes a difference on at least a couple levels. One is from the negotiation itself. It changes the dynamics of the negotiation, which clearly the White House is looking at, thinking that if you negotiate with one party at a time instead of two, that you, the United States, are able to drive a different sort of deal and force the other party to make other concessions, particularly because their economy isn't as large and perhaps they're not as powerful politically as the United States. If you're dealing with two countries, they can then coordinate their approach and maybe make things more difficult for the United States. But substantively, it also matters, and I think this is the point that a lot of people miss. We are not just three countries in a region. We are North America, and the way that the supply chains and production has gone together since NAFTA was first passed means that we are three fully integrated economies. So it's difficult to disaggregate those three economies from each other, and so negotiating as separate parties is really going to complicate things, not make it any easier.
To complicate it a bit further, there's a big Mexican election coming up this summer, in which, as I understand, Mr. Obrador is ahead in the polls. He doesn't seem to be much of a fan of President Trump or NAFTA. How does the bilateral nature of the negotiation that might take place with Mexico really affect that election, or vice versa?
Well, you're quite right. July 1st is the date of the elections, and Andrés Manuel López Obrador is the leading candidate. We have to wait until the votes are actually counted before we declare the victor, but he is leading in the polls. You know, he has come out recently and said that he actually wants to see NAFTA continue forward, but he is also somewhat of a nationalist, perhaps, and one would anticipate that he would take a bit more of a strident position vis-a-vis the United States if indeed he is elected. So it will complicate things. He probably won't have a huge amount of political space. Indeed, no Mexican president who might be elected on July 1st would have a lot of political space to make a lot of concessions to the United States. This is becoming much more politically complicated within Mexico. And you can't, in trade negotiations, it's not just about the trade. It's also about the politics. And you can't discount that.
Well, it's about the trade and about the politics, but also, particularly with Mexico, there are other issues like security, like drug interdiction, all sorts of other issues that thus far, as far as I can see, have not been put on the table explicitly. If we push Mexico too far, what are the possible other ways that we could be affected in the United States beyond just trade?
Yeah, that's very true and very important to point out. They are not specifically part of a trade negotiation, nor should they, but clearly cooperation on counter-narcotics, cooperation on immigration, one of the president's priorities, cooperation on security and anti-terrorism. These are issues where there's a very fluid exchange every day with Mexico. It's very important to the national security interests of the United States. But again, that depends on trust and goodwill. And if Mexico feels itself an aggrieved party within the trade space and with the economic space, there is no law that requires them to cooperate with the United States, and senior officials from time to time have alluded to the fact that Mexico might indeed decide to pull back some of that cooperation. Indeed, the outgoing president of Mexico, Enrique Peña Nieto, has ordered a review of the full range of cooperation that Mexico is currently undergoing with the United States, really as a shot across the bow to the U.S., saying, look at what is at stake. Tread lightly. Don't do anything that you might regret over the longer term.